Hello, everyone. I'm Sir Alex, your course facilitator. Welcome to ELS213, Introduction to Pragmatics. I'm excited to dive into this topic with you. Pragmatics is a fascinating field because it's all about how we use language in the real world, beyond just words and grammar. Think about it, have you ever said something and been completely misunderstood? Or used a phrase that meant something totally different depending on the situation? That's the stuff of pragmatics. We're going to explore what I like to call the hidden rules of conversation. These are the unspoken principles that help us understand what people really mean, not just what they literally say. It's the difference between hearing words and understanding their purpose. By the end of this module, we'll be able to tackle some key concepts. We'll start by defining pragmatics and its core ideas. Then, we'll clearly differentiate it from semantics, which is another area of language study. We'll also see how pragmatics compares to discourse analysis and how their focus differs. We'll then get into the main branches of pragmatic study and look at the historical development of this field. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we explain why context is so crucial in understanding how we communicate. So, what exactly is pragmatics? Simply put, it's the study of meaning in context. Grammar teaches us the structure of language, how to build a correct sentence. Pragmatics, on the other hand, looks at how we use those structures to accomplish specific goals. It's about what a speaker intends to communicate and how a listener interprets that meaning based on the situation. Think of it this way, the same exact sentence can have multiple meanings depending on when, where, and by whom it's said. Pragmatics helps us make sense of that. Let's look at a classic example from a classroom setting. Imagine a classmate says, "It's hot in here." Literal meaning, the temperature in the room is high. That's the dictionary definition, the semantic meaning. Intended meaning, what are they really trying to say? They're probably hinting, "Please open the window," or maybe just expressing that they are uncomfortable. This is a perfect example of an indirect speech act. The speaker's real intention isn't explicitly stated but is easily understood by everyone because you share the same context, being in a hot classroom. You don't respond by saying, "Yes, I agree, the temperature is indeed high." You get up and open the window because you understand the unspoken request. Here's another example, this time from the workplace. Your boss walks up and says, "Could you finish this report today?" Literal meaning, this is a yes/no question about your ability to complete a task. Intended meaning, you know this isn't a question you can simply answer with, "No, I couldn't." This is a directive, an order or a strong request to get the report done by the end of the day. Your pragmatic competence is what tells you this isn't a simple question, it's a command. If you were to respond, "Yes, I could," and then not do the work, you'd be grammatically correct but you'd be failing at a pragmatic level. You would likely get in trouble because you ignored the intended meaning of the boss's words. Pragmatics is a broad field with several key areas of study. Deixis, this is about words that point to something, like this, that, here, there, I, and you. Their meaning depends entirely on the context of who is speaking, to whom, and where. Speech acts, this branch examines how we use language to do things, like apologizing, promising, requesting, or giving an order. As we saw with the boss example, we can perform an action with our words. Implicature, this is the art of reading between the lines. It's about the things we hint at or suggest without directly saying them. For example, if I ask, "Are you hungry?" and you say, "I ate a huge dinner," you're implicating that you're not hungry. Presupposition, this refers to the unspoken assumptions a speaker makes that must be true for their statement to make sense. If I say, "My brother is a doctor," I'm presupposing that I have a brother. If I don't, the sentence is still grammatically correct, but the presupposition is false. Politeness, this is about the strategies we use to be polite and save face in social situations, especially across different cultures. For instance, a polite request like, "Would you mind closing the door?" is often more effective than a direct command like, "Close the door." Let's continue with a few more key topics in pragmatics. These are a bit more specialized but just as fascinating. First, there's relevance theory. This theory suggests that our brains are wired to look for relevance. We automatically pay attention to information that gives us the most understanding for the least amount of mental effort. If someone shouts a snake while you're hiking, that single word is highly relevant because it has a huge contextual effect for a very small cognitive effort. Next is cross-cultural pragmatics, which is super important in our globalized world. It looks at how pragmatic principles vary across different cultures and languages. For instance, the way we show respect, make requests, or even disagree can be very different. What is considered polite in the Philippines might be seen as indirect or inefficient in another culture. Then we have conversational analysis. This is like looking at a conversation under a microscope. It examines the very structure of how we talk, including things like turn-taking, how we know when to speak, repairs, how we fix misunderstandings, like saying, huh, and adjacency pairs, the fact that a question usually gets an answer. Moving on, cognitive pragmatics focuses on the brain. It explores the mental processes that allow us to understand pragmatic meaning. What's happening in our minds when we figure out sarcasm or understand a metaphor? This field connects language to psychology. Lastly, there's developmental pragmatics. This area studies how pragmatic competence develops in children and language learners. It asks questions like, how does a child learn to use polite language or understand a joke? It traces our journey from making our first social interactions to mastering complex conversational skills. Let's clarify the difference between pragmatics and semantics, which can sometimes be confusing. Semantics studies the literal, dictionary meaning of words and sentences. It's concerned with truth conditions. For example, the sentence, "The sun is hot," is semantically true no matter who says it or where it's said. Pragmatics studies the meaning as it is used by specific people in specific situations. It focuses on the speaker's intention and the listener's interpretation within that context. The key difference is that semantics is about the meaning of language in isolation, while pragmatics is about the meaning of language in action. Let's use the phrase, "the bank is open," to illustrate this difference. Semantic meaning, the literal, unchanging meaning is that a financial institution is not closed for business. This meaning is constant whether a friend, a banker, or a robber says it. Pragmatic meanings, the meaning changes completely based on context. If a friend asks you for cash, saying, "the bank is open," means, you can go get money there now. If you're in a crime movie and one robber says it to another, it's a signal to begin their plan. If a student says it on a weekend, it might mean, the library's study space is available, because that's what their group calls it. As you can see, the literal semantic meaning stays the same, but the pragmatic meaning shifts dramatically depending on the situation and shared knowledge. Pragmatics and discourse analysis are similar because they both look at language in context, but their scope and focus are different. Pragmatics focuses on individual utterances or single moments in a conversation. It asks, what is the speaker's intention right now, and how is this specific phrase understood in this moment? For example, analyzing the phrase, "you should go," to determine if it's a command or a suggestion. Discourse analysis looks at larger units of language, entire conversations, written text, or speeches. It examines how the whole conversation is structured, how people take turns, and how the entire text is organized and made coherent. An example would be analyzing the entire conversation two friends have while planning a trip. To make this clear, let's use the analogy from the slide. Pragmatics is like studying a single tree in a forest, while discourse analysis is like studying the entire forest. Imagine two friends planning a trip to Italy. A pragmatic analysis would zoom in on a single line, like, "I'm so excited." It would consider what that utterance implies about the speaker's feelings and the moment in the conversation. A discourse analysis would look at the whole conversation, how they started talking about the trip, how they took turns suggesting ideas, how they reached a final decision, and how they ended the conversation. Pragmatics is a relatively new field in linguistics, really taking off in the mid-20th century. It emerged because philosophers and linguists realized that semantics alone couldn't explain how language truly works. Here are the key figures who shaped the field. Charles Morris, in the 1930s, he was the first to use the term pragmatics. He saw it as one of three parts of semiotics, along with syntax, grammar, and semantics, literal meaning. J.L. Austin, in the 1950s, he developed the speech acts theory in his book How to Do Things with Words. This was revolutionary because it proposed that we don't just say things, we do things with our words. H.P. Grice, in the 1960s, he introduced the cooperative principle. He argued that in a conversation, people generally cooperate by following four rules or maxims: be truthful, quality, be informative, quantity, stay on topic, relation, and be clear, manner. Now, let's introduce deeper about the people who shaped this field. Think of them as the pioneers who realized that language is more than just words and grammar rules, it's about what we do with those words. First up, we have Charles Morris. In the 1930s, he was the one who actually gave pragmatics its name. He saw language study, or semiotics, as a three-part puzzle. There's syntax, which is how we arrange words, semantics, the dictionary meaning of those words, and his big idea, pragmatics, which is the relationship between the words and the people using them. He basically put us, the speakers and listeners, into the equation. Next, let's jump to the 1950s and meet J.L. Austin, a British philosopher. Austin gave us the groundbreaking speech acts theory. His idea was simple but powerful: when we speak, we're not just saying things, we're doing things. When you say, "I promise to be there," you're not just describing a promise, you are actively making one. When a priest says, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," they are performing the action of marrying. That's a speech act. Finally, we have H.P. Grice from the 1960s. Grice was fascinated by how we understand each other even when we don't say things directly. He proposed the cooperative principle, suggesting that in conversation, we all follow unwritten rules to be understood. We'll dive deeper into his maxims later, but basically, he argued that we assume people are being truthful, relevant, and clear when they talk to us. He helped explain how we can read between the lines. So, if pragmatics is about meaning beyond the literal words, what's the magic ingredient that helps us figure it all out? As you can see on this slide, it's context. In pragmatics, context isn't just important. It is everything. Look at the images here. We see the word bark. Without context, what does this mean? Are we talking about the sound a dog makes? Or the outer layer of a tree? Or maybe even a type of ship, like a bark? The word itself is ambiguous, it can be misunderstood. It's the situation, the context, that clarifies the meaning. If you're in a park with a dog, bark means one thing. If you're in a forest, it means another. As linguist Michael Ho puts it, pragmatics is basically the study of how this context-dependent meaning is created and understood. It's the frame around the picture that tells us how to interpret the picture itself. Okay, so if context is so critical, let's break it down. There are three main types of context we rely on constantly, usually without even thinking about it. First is the physical context. This is the where and what of a conversation, the actual, tangible world around us. The example here is perfect, look at that. If I said that to you right now while pointing, you'd look where I'm pointing. The physical setting and my gesture are essential. Without them, the sentence is meaningless. Second, we have linguistic context. This is the context within the conversation itself. It's the words that came before. For example, if I start a sentence with, "he did," your first question would be, who is he? The meaning of he depends entirely on what we were just talking about. The previous sentences provide the context you need. Third, and this one is super important, is the social context. This is all about the relationship between the speakers and the social setting. Imagine you and your friend are joking around, and you eat their last piece of lumpia. They might laugh and say, "You're under arrest." Now, imagine a police officer says the exact same words to you. Same words, but the social context, the power dynamic, the relationship, gives them a completely different meaning and, of course, very different consequences. Let's zoom in on that physical context example. When someone points and says, "Look at that," they are using what linguists call deixis. That sounds like a technical term, but it's really simple. Deixis comes from a Greek word meaning to point or to show. So, deictic words are essentially pointing words. Words like this, that, here, there, I, you, now, and then are all deictic expressions. Their meaning is entirely dependent on the immediate physical situation. If you get a text from a friend that says, "Meet me here in an hour," but you don't know where "here" is, the message fails. You need that shared physical space to understand the pointing words. So, to understand, look at that, you need to see the object, the gesture, and the whole environment. That's physical context in action. Now let's dive deeper into the social context, because this is where communication gets really nuanced. The slide shows the same words. "You're under arrest," having two completely different effects, or what we call pragmatic force. When a police officer says it, their words carry authority. Their role in society gives those words the force of a legal action. It's a serious declaration with real-world consequences. But when your friend says it after you steal the last fry, it's a joke. The friendship, the informal setting, and the playful situation strip the words of their legal power. The pragmatic force here is teasing, not arresting. The key takeaway is that the social relationship and power dynamic are not just background noise, they are crucial for interpreting the real meaning. Context determines whether words are an official act or just a bit of fun. Alright, beyond the physical, linguistic, and social context, there's another layer that's essential for communication to work smoothly. We call this common ground or shared knowledge. Think of it as the collection of beliefs, assumptions, and experiences that everyone in the conversation shares. A perfect example is the simple greeting, "How are you?" or as we'd say, "Kumusta ka?" When a classmate you barely know asks you this while walking past the ISU library, you both share the common ground that this is just a polite greeting, not a serious medical inquiry. You both assume the expected response is a short and simple, "I'm good, thanks," or "Okay lang, ikaw." This is deeply tied to our cultural context. In some cultures, this question might be seen as more literal, but in ours, it's often a social formality. Now, imagine if that common ground was absent. If you responded with a 10-minute detailed story about your health problems, it would be awkward, right? That's because you'd be violating the shared, unspoken rules. Common ground is what allows us to communicate efficiently without having to explain every single thing. So, what's the point of all this? Why should we, as English majors, care about these different types of context? Because understanding them is what turns us from people who just know grammar into truly effective communicators. This skill is called pragmatic competence. It involves 4 key abilities. First, reading context clues. This means being a good detective, picking up on the social, physical, and linguistic signals that tell you the real meaning behind the words. Second, building common ground. This is about actively making sure you and the person you're talking to are on the same page, with a shared understanding to avoid miscommunication. Third, adapting to situations. You don't talk to your professor the same way you talk to your little brother. This is your ability to adjust your style based on who you're talking to, where you are, and what your goal is. And finally, interpreting intent. This is the ultimate goal, to understand what people really mean, not just what their words literally say. It's about getting the intended message. Alright, we've covered a lot of ground. So let's quickly summarize the most important points from our discussion. These are the key takeaways I want you to remember. First, pragmatics studies meaning in context. It goes way beyond dictionary definitions to look at the speaker's intention and the listener's interpretation. Second, context is critical. Physical, linguistic, and social contexts, along with our shared common ground, are what shape the meaning of everything we say. Third, remember that pragmatics is different from semantics and discourse analysis. Semantics is about literal meaning, and discourse analysis looks at entire conversations. Pragmatics zooms in on the speaker's intended meaning in specific moments. And finally, and most importantly for us, understanding these principles is essential for effective communication. Mastering pragmatics helps us navigate any social, academic, or professional situation with confidence and skill. And last but not least, for those of you who are curious and want to explore these ideas further, this slide lists the foundational books and articles where these theories come from. Scholars like Austin, Grice, and Yule are the giants on whose shoulders this entire field stands. Thank you so much for your attention. You can now return to our course website and answer the quiz and accomplish and submit the learning task for Module 1.